Minister, let's get back to the point that, that Lullu Krugel was raising just before we took a break. The ability of the government to plan, procure and monitor projects. Government is only spending something in the region of 70% of its infrastructure project. You're quadrupling this or even more. What makes you think you're going to get it right this time?
You know,
do you have the processes in place?
We acknowledge that there is unevenness in terms of capacity. If you look at the capacity available in state-owned companies, the big ones, if you look at the capacity in smaller state-owned companies, as well as capacity between the state-owned companies and the different government tiers, the provincial and even municipal governments. But we must also acknowledge two facts. One is that we had not built such mega projects, infrastructure in quite a long time, and therefore the capacity, the skills needs to be built. It's not going to be immediately or automatically available. You need to build it over time. And
how are you going to do that?
We are doing that through recruitment, through sharing of the skills, through, if you look at what ESCOM is doing, for example, codifying the challenges and experiences of Medupi into a module that they are using to train their project managers. And
look
their
how far behind
academies.
schedule Medupi is.
But Medupi came into place after a long interregnum of not building new infrastructure, when existing capacity at ESCOM had moved on and others had retired. So all of those challenges, this infrastructure program is at its infancy. We must acknowledge that it's going to face challenges, but we're going to build momentum as we move forward.
All right, Lullu Krugel, are you convinced that momentum can be built, that the government, public enterprises can overcome these myriad challenges successfully in order to accelerate this build program, which is absolutely critical? It's a tough call, it's a big ask.
It is not an easy task, and I must be honest, I am sometimes glad I'm not in the ministers or other government employees' shoes, but there is definitely, as the minister has said, I know there is a lot of programs in place. Unfortunately, it does take some time, and we've had a period where we really didn't build up our supply of artisans, for example. There's a lot of private sector activities that's coming through as well. So all of that will put immense pressure on skills, and it will not be an easy task to make sure that we have
Angela,
people
is it
to
a
deliver.
pressure that we can withstand and rise above and actually deliver on what the minister is trying to do?
Well, there is pressure that I think we as citizens face at the everyday level of living, and then there is the pressure that government faces at the point of having to deliver many of these on these promises that they make. But there are other concerns, which is that, you know, learning curves and difficulties have casualties. And some of these government processes, from procurement to delivery, have been quite onerous and quite long. And small to medium enterprises are particularly harshly affected by these changes. And large megacorps like ESCOM are not as nastily affected. And it's at that level of efficiency of procedure that the government has to, I think, begin to improve its performance.
How would you improve that level of efficiency?
Well, I don't know, since I'm not in government. That's a fairer question for the minister to answer, how he is or how his department intends to.
No advice for the minister in that respect? Minister, it's an important issue.
It's
I mean, you have red tape to cut through, you have efficiencies to improve, and yet you also have a deadline that you're working against. Simple things like Lullu Krugel has just raised about a lack of artisans, no artisan training for the past 2 decades. Again, what's the plan here?
The learner pipeline of state-owned companies has actually expanded over the last 2 to 3 years, so that there is a number of artisans, of technicians who are undergoing training, and that's going to contribute towards solving our problem. And as Lulu says, the private sector is also coming to the party. I've met a number of people who are saying that we've established institutions who are training artisans. Can we partner with state-owned companies to ensure that these young artisans can get on-the-job training to gain experience? But what is important for us to bear in mind is that it's an important learning curve for the country. We cannot avoid going through this particular experience so that we can develop the capacity that we need to implement these infrastructure.
Fair point, but Lullu Krugel, do we have the luxury of a learning curve here?
The unfortunate situation is that we're really squeezed in terms of funding. We have to be efficient in terms of allocating where the money would go, and then we need to be efficient in terms of actually spending the money. And there is not a lot to go around at the moment.
So how difficult is it going to be to prioritize and sequence according to this integrative strategy that the Minister was referring to?
We don't have a choice, we have to do it, but it's definitely no easy task. How to make decisions between social and economic infrastructure, as an example. We need the economic infrastructure, but we also need schools and hospitals. So making those choices is definitely not an easy task.
And that's something which you're very passionate about, is achieving that balance.
Yes, because I think for the ordinary citizen, the larger spectacular projects that we see are not necessarily affecting the immediate experience of daily life, despite the knock-on effects of employment. If your child has no school to go to, if you have no hospital in the area that you can visit, if the roads there are poor, it doesn't matter if there is a fantastic coal train exporting coal hundreds of miles away from your home. Your immediate experience, as we've seen in communities in South Africa, is compromised despite the fact that one part of the country looks like it's growing, your community is struggling.
Answer the question, Minister. What is more important?
I think
getting rid of pit latrines where children die, or a state-of-the-art railroad?
I think that's a simplistic analysis. If you look at Medupi, it's a project that will be completed around 2019. That's when the entire Medupi will be kicking and fully commissioned. In the process, 17,000 jobs have been created, not in 2019, but in 2012. Now, you have the largest employment site in the Southern Hemisphere at Medupi. People who are developing, who are earning an income that helps to improve the quality of lives of their children, of their families, and around each person there is about 5 or more dependents. And so you take this 17,000 and you can multiply it by 3 or even 5. Over 14,000 people employed at Kusile. You've got thousands of other people. SIP2, which is the Gauteng, Free State and Durban corridor, has created about 11,000 jobs.
Angelo Fick, respond to that. Your analysis says the Minister is a little simplistic.
Well, the Minister can fling out numbers at us, but we also sit in a country where we all watch the news, and there are real crises for communities, and there are real problems for municipalities in delivering to those communities. And we can't deny that while there are very great successes to the infrastructure development project, and no one is denying it, there are also concerns for how far out this is going to roll. Will it reach all of these citizens? And what happens to citizens in communities where this doesn't reach? What happens when the rollout doesn't happen because at the community level, at the municipal level, there isn't capacity to manage these funds, to spend it? We have a long record of underspending, of corruption, of fraud. How do we undo that magically in 5 years?
Lulu, do you have a view on that?
I think it would be unfair not to give government the opportunity to try. And I mean, there's really some of the things that we've seen must make you proud to be a South African. I do understand also that a lot of us are looking at this and are being skeptical because of our track record. But I think, and I agree with the Minister, there are some lessons that we've learned. There is a real focus on capacity building. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's room to make mistakes at this point in time.
All right, part 3 and the final part of this discussion, we want to look at public perception. It's important that we actually sell this to South Africans. The other big issue that we need to touch on is how are we going to pay for it? Minister, I want to get to the money in just a moment, because none of this is going to happen unless you can fund it. But both our other guests have raised an important issue here about convincing the public that this is in their best interests. Apart from the money, you have a public perception battle that you need to overcome. How are you going to do that?
I think the easier part is convincing the public that this is in their very best interest, because everybody can understand we need new power stations, we need new roads, we need to refurbish the existing roads, you need new rail infrastructure, both for passengers as well as for freight, you need new ports. All of these things that we say we need, municipal infrastructure, schools, clinics, hospitals.
But why should a person in Limpopo be worried about a new port in Durban?
Because that port is going to serve the rest of the South African economy. The mines, the minerals that are going to be mined out of Limpopo are going to be transported right to Durban or even Richards Bay and exported, right. And that's going to create jobs in Limpopo. It's going to sustain the jobs in Limpopo. It's going to create business right across the corridor from Limpopo until you reach Durban. But the perceptions that we need to deal with, we are a young democracy. We need to bear that in mind. We're only 20 years old. So, and we've not undertaken mega projects of this size and scale. So there will be real perceptions. Are we going to be able to deliver this? Will we live up to the promise? How are we going to deal with the challenges of corruption, the challenges of financing all of these projects?
Right,
so
let's pick up on the financing.
Lullu Krugel, we're talking about.
It's a king's ransom here. This is obviously going to be something done in conjunction with the public and the private sector as well, I would imagine, as the donor community and international funding organizations. Realistically, how difficult is this going to be?
We are in an economic environment where it's not that easy to get funding. It's not easy to convince investors that your projects are worthwhile. We've had a year or two in South Africa where we've had rating agencies downgrade our investment grades, which is not a favorable position to be in. We need a mix of funding. We need some tax funding. There's some funds that need to come from abroad, from the bond market, from the users that use these services. And it's not going to be an easy environment to actually get that money at the moment.
Angela, any thoughts on the financing? How do you convince people that this is a good investment?
Well, my sense is that the government really does have its work cut out when it has to start selling the idea to consumers that they will have to pay for these. We've had 20 years of promises that services would be delivered to people, and now we're going to suggest that they start paying a little more for those services before they arrive and at the point of arrival. And again, one is not speaking against any of these projects, but one must realize that there will be challenges in convincing very ordinary South Africans to pay even more for services they haven't seen yet and are promised once again.
In other words, Minister, increased tariffs coming out of Eskom and Transnet. Is this how it's going to be funded?
Not only that, there is a basket of options that are going to be employed in funding the infrastructure. One of them, as the President has been exploring, is the establishment of an infrastructure fund. The other one is public-public partnerships. That's partnerships between state-owned companies and DFIs. Public-private partnerships is another option. And so there's a number of options that are available to fund the infrastructure. But we must not take away the user pay principle and say to the public that, no, you must not support this infrastructure because you are going to have to pay for it. There are elements of the infrastructure that are going to have to be paid for, and we must support doing that as a country in order to achieve the world-class infrastructure that we need for our country.
But e-tolls is one example, and the public hasn't been particularly keen on paying for that, has it?
Well, there have been challenges with regard to the levels of consultation around e-tolls, the type of discussion which has taken place, in some measure which has been very one-sided, because it has also neglected the fact that you have got the best public road infrastructure in Gauteng that a number of other provinces and people in cities outside Johannesburg are also paying for
Minister, time unfortunately is against us. As Lullu Krugel said a little earlier, glad that we're not in your shoes. Thank you very much for joining us. Angelo Fick to you as well. Minister Malusi, Gigaba, and also to Lullu Krugel from KPMG. This is Newsnight. The 8 o'clock news follows.
Know more about your world. eNCA.com